I will say this, even if he is found guilty of every little thing that they have alleged in this indictment, I'm still proud to stand on that hill and proud to die on that
Yeah,
hill
well, that's our
because
system of justice. And this is, yeah.
exactly
And
all
this
we
is,
ever asked for, and this is what I
yeah,
was bitching about for the last two podcast
yeah,
episodes, was due process. All we
right.
ever asked for was for him to have his day in court. And when
Yeah,
they sent him to CCOT, he didn't get
yeah,
it, and now he will.
right.
And so we're going to get to see due process in action. And as a defense lawyer and a citizen of this country that I love, who prides itself on affording every single person their rights and under the Constitution, I'm super glad that he's stateside, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing.
Hey, everybody. Doug Passon coming to you from the home studio. It's a lovely Saturday afternoon. The date is June 7th, 2025, and I just did two back-to-back episodes in connection with the Truth Be Found podcast on Kilmar Abrego-Garcia and his unlawful sentence to a maximum security prison in El Salvador. And I never thought that I would be doing a threefer. This is our
Mm.
first trilogy, but there was obviously a recent development this yesterday
Yep.
that Kilmar Garcia is home again. So we need to talk about all of it. And Mark was glaringly absent from those two Truth Be Found podcast episodes, so I had no choice but to drag him back on to Set for Sentencing to talk about all of this and more. So always good to see you, my friend, my brother, my colleague. How are you?
I'm doing well, Doug. Good to see you too.
Okay, good. Well, I'm
Yep.
so glad you're here, but let's just set this up. So, first of all, since it's Saturday, you know I'm going to be drinking tequila for this podcast, and
Excellent.
I had I had trouble because I like to make it relevant. I like to make it thematic. I like to make
Mm.
it, some sort of expression of what we're doing here today. And I was really struggling with myself because what I figured out is I had to do something that I never do ever, and that is
Oh,
Clase
oh,
Azul.
oh.
Yeah, so
Well, that's a pretty bottle.
it
Jeez.
is a pretty bottle, and
Wow.
this is why. Let me explain to you why. This is garbage tequila, but it's in a very special bottle. And I have a saying when it comes to tequila,
Marketing.
which is, yeah, it's totally a marketing ploy. And look how big this bottle is. It's got to be on the top shelf because it's too tall to be on another shelf. Look, it's even got a little belt on the top. So this is what we call all hat and no cattle. This is what we call a very, very fancy bottle. But I have a saying when it comes to a lot of these fancy bottles, and it goes like this: the prettier the bottle, the shittier the juice. And so I
Ah,
am going to just ceremoniously, and I may throw up in my mouth, but I'm going to take the tiniest sip before I move on to an actual real tequila. But yeah,
okay.
this is a very expensive bottle, and it's just a terrible, horrible, no
Oh,
good tequila. And why? Because it's
lipstick on a
fake.
pig.
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Because it's fake. It's not
Oh.
made right, and there's additives and sugar and all this stuff that's added to make it taste better than it is because it was made wrong. If you make
Ah,
tequila right,
yeah.
you shouldn't have to add anything to it. So, and if you smell it, it smells like pure vanilla and sugar. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, oh,
Oh, yeah. That's what we call a mixing tequila.
oh God,
Yeah.
this is not a mix. This is what I wouldn't use that to clean my toilet. But if you haven't figured it out, there's an indictment now against Kilmar Garcia Abrego, and they brought
Well,
him
who is
back.
he? Who is he for people that may not have been following? Because
Well,
there's been so much going
yes,
on.
I will do that, but I will
Yeah.
just say the reason I've done the fake tequila and all hat, no cattle is because that's how I view this indictment. Talk about
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And before we do that, I'm going to now drink a beautiful tequila. This is a very special Cascanes, and it's called Nuestras Raíces, which I believe means our roots. And I think
Oh,
that's
okay.
pretty important too, because
Mm,
with this Garcia Abrego thing, we've been talking about the Constitution and due process, and I don't
yeah.
think there's any better expression of our roots and what makes America America than that. So give us the you for our audience who for the two people who've never heard of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is he?
So he was deported by the Trump administration. It was a summary deportation, meaning he did not have it. There was no hearing. He was just alleged to have been. This is where I'm a little confused because so much has changed. He was alleged to be part of a gang, but I'm not sure if it was MS-13
It
originally.
was.
Okay.
It was.
So it
And
was
by the
MS.
way,
Yeah.
deported is a very kind word. I say kidnapped because he was
Well,
basically
yeah, because it was
thrown
without
on
due
a
process.
plane,
Right.
no
Right.
hearing, and sent to
Right. No
not
hearing, no due
because,
process.
by the way, a deportation would be, I'm going to send you back to your home country. Okay, fine. He was sent back to his home country because he is from El Salvador, but he was sent to prison,
Right.
having
Yeah.
committed no crime.
To
Maximum
that
security,
that
CCOT.
terrorism one.
Yeah, it's
Right.
called CCOT. And
Yeah.
so this is not a run-of-the-mill deportation. This is something extraordinary and
Oh,
ugly.
wait, time out. We don't know if that is run of the mill or not, and that's what's scary. And what I mean by that is this particular case has gotten a lot of media attention, but you know as well as I do, there's a lot of other cases out there that may not have where this has happened to others. Just there are no family members, no attorneys involved for those
Yeah.
individuals that are going out. And so we don't know how much of an anomaly
Well, you're
Abrego
right.
Garcia
You're
is,
right. And what we
which is
do
even more
know,
frightening.
here's what we do know. They did this to 261 people in this
Yeah.
sweep, and 238 of them, they did it under this Alien Enemies Act, accusing them of belonging to Trende Aragua, and then 23 of them they've accused of being MS-13. So they're all alleged gang members, but there was no due process to prove whether they were a gang or not in a gang, or whether they were once in a gang and no longer affiliated with a gang. They just swept all these people up, 261, and you're right. We don't know how many of them are, you know, 'cause there could be actual citizens, there could be U.S. citizens swept
Correct.
up in that, but
Yes.
we would never know because they
Yes.
never
Yeah.
got a hearing and never had a lawyer and can't talk to their families.
Right.
So anyway, good point.
Yeah.
So Abrego Garcia became sort of the poster child for these 261 people, which is great. And a lot of high-ranking officials swore up and down he is never coming back. Never coming
Yeah.
back.
Right.
Kristi Noem, I'll quote her,
Yeah.
quote, there is no scenario where Abrego Garcia will be in the United States again.
Yeah.
Pam
Whoops.
Bondi, Pam
Yeah.
Bondi, quote, he is not coming back to our country. President Bukele said he's not sending him back. That's the end of the story. She said, quote, there was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country. None, none. Two nuns. And then when Bukele was here, and Trump was saying we should build five more CCOTs, by the way. But he said they asked him, would you send him back if the United States wanted you to? And he said, how can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? Of course, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, perhaps because the Supreme Court has, ordered them to remedy this situation or whatever, they brought him back. But as a giant FU to everyone, they brought him back with a very, very ugly criminal indictment out of the district, is it the Middle District of Tennessee and out of
Yeah.
Nashville. And so he has an indictment and he's back and we're going to talk about a couple of things. One, what are the potential guidelines in the worst case scenario? I hope
Hmm.
you can talk about some of the sentencing stats.
Yep.
I've read the indictment and I've read the bail motion that the government has filed. And
Hmm.
I see a lot of problems in there. I see a lot of red flags in there. So we're going to talk about what I view as preliminarily, obviously, the substance of these allegations. And then just generally, I've handled cases like this in
Hmm.
my many years in the federal system. And I have a feeling that they're going to be treating Mr. Abrego-Garcia quite differently than they treat your run-of-the-mill alleged alien smuggler. And I want to talk a bit about that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess let's just start with the indictment. What is he charged with? And what are the possible sentencing ranges there? We want to start
So,
there?
yeah. So he's looking at two counts of violating Title 8, Section 1324, which has to do with conspiracy to transport an alien, we may say in just regular or colloquially human trafficking. So yeah, he's been charged with two counts of that. Yeah, I'm just confirming looking at this. And he has a forfeiture allegation there too, to forfeit the car that he was caught using.
And there's a
Um,
conspiracy count as
yeah,
well,
there's a
right? Section 2.
yeah, count two. Well, let me see that.
I see 18 USC Section 2, which I
Yeah, is
on the
usually the
caption.
conspiracy. Yeah, the principal. But yeah, I'm sorry, count one is the conspiracy count, the conspiracy to engage in human trafficking, essentially. And
Yeah.
then count two is the substantive human
Yeah.
trafficking, unlawful transportation of undocumented aliens. And what's interesting about this particular indictment is, as they say in the media, that this appears to be somewhat of a speaking indictment. It doesn't just allege the bare facts of the
Mhm.
statute. It goes into some
Right.
detail about the offense conduct, and
Yeah.
some of that offense, and why that's interesting is it tipped me off about where they're going to go with respect to sentencing, and maybe we might be not there yet in our
Yeah.
discussion, but there are some interesting and complicated, well, I should say complicated. There are some aggravating factors in here that, if proved, is going to really jack his sentence up
Yeah.
significantly if
Well,
he's
and
convicted. Yeah.
yes, and you're going to talk about that,
Yeah.
but there's another reason that they're doing a speaking indictment
Oh,
here.
yeah. That's
They're
just for the
they're
press and propaganda.
Yeah, they're trying to
Yeah.
dirty him up. And
Yeah.
the big question I'm going to have is what of all this stuff are they ever going to be able to prove in a court of law? But, what happens is the pressure and what Pam Bondi called the bright light of the media was shining. And so we got that, that got him out of prison. But, they had to save face and they're trying to make this political and they're
Yeah.
trying to brand him now as a uber violent human trafficker, MS-13, just the lowest of the low, so that they can point a finger in the face of the people who stood up for due process and say, "See, this is the lowest of the low kind of person that you're trying to cheerlead for, and you're sick and you're wrong and you're blah blah blah." So they have
Yeah.
included between this indictment and the motion they filed to keep him in custody pending the resolution of this case, they have included some of the most ridiculously serious allegations they could ever include. But again, this is a class. I fear this is a class azul type situation because I don't think they're going to be able to prove a fraction of what they're saying in this indictment. But go ahead.
Well, so one of the things that's interesting though about the indictment is it mentions five cooperating conspirators and just references them by, CC1, CC2, etc.
Yeah.
That to me, if I was his counsel, would be, of course, a red flag, because generally, oh crap, you got cooperators against you. That makes it that much more difficult to
Right.
defend a case. What's interesting though here, and kind of like piggybacking on what you were saying about the vindictive nature of this, of the prosecution of this indictment, he gets sent down to El Salvador. There's an uproar because the violation of his due process. And so vindictively, okay, fine, we'll bring him back, but now we're going to indict him. I am curious about when these other cooperating co-conspirators were first interviewed. My hunch is that they did not go to these individuals until after the uproar about Abrego Garcia being deported with, or kidnapped, extradited, or whatever the term. I have to figure out what that term would be, but illegally removed from the country.
Yeah.
If all of the information supporting this indictment, which is based upon all these cooperating co-conspirators, if that wasn't gathered until after the fact, once he was down there, because my guess is they really hammered these individuals and scared the crap out of them to get them to say anything
Yeah.
to
Well,
support the
yeah.
allegations
Like
in this
so.
indictment.
So A, we have no idea who they are.
Right.
B, we have no idea of their credibility.
Correct.
Generally, defense lawyers know to be deeply suspicious of cooperating people, whether they're co-conspirators, unindicted co-conspirators, or whatever. They're they People don't come forward, especially in gang. There's a code
Yeah.
of silence. And in fact, these gang tattoos that they say he has on him that say he's an MS-13, we talked about this in the last two episodes. They could be MS-13, but they're generally see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. It's a code of silence,
Mm.
which people adhere to in the world of crime committing, right? So who are these people? And what have they said? Why have they said it? And what is
Why?
their
Yes.
credibility? And
Yeah.
if they're people who have been, sentenced to many years in prison
Yep.
for whatever they were up to, then of course they have a motive to give false testimony against someone because cooperation is currency.
Mhm.
They use it to get out of jail earlier. So who
Yep.
knows? But the point
Right.
is, you should be deeply suspicious of that. And by the way, did you notice the date range in this indictment?
2016 through 2025.
Yeah. So we're going back almost 10 years, which is
Yeah. Well,
peculiar.
it is peculiar because why did they indict him before? If this has been
Yeah.
going on in such a big conspiracy over hundreds of trips, hundreds of individuals that he personally is alleged to
Yeah.
have transported, many of which were gang members themselves, according to the indictment. Why are they waiting
Yeah.
until now to indict this
Yeah.
guy?
Right. And
And
there's really only
that goes
one.
back, right, that goes back to the, sorry to interrupt, Doug, but that goes back to my real sneaking suspicion here is that they hammered these other individuals into just coughing up anything against this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's really only one that I could see in all this, only one instance where they actually have him, evidence of him doing something. In other words, police contact. And that was
Mm,
in back in 2022, November of 2022. So even then,
yeah,
why is he not charged, arrested, prosecuted for whatever that law enforcement, that sort of central component of this way back from 2022?
yeah.
And not for nothing, before you dig in so much, we're defense lawyers. So people, the Twitter, the YouTube commenters who will give me all kinds of shit for this and say, you're the one that's politicizing it and then blah, blah, blah. You don't have to take my word for it. And you don't have to take Mark Ellenbaugh's word for it. You just have to look at what happened after this indictment came down. And what happened was there's a gentleman named Ben Schrader who for 15 years has been an assistant United States attorney in the Middle District of Tennessee. And as of late was the chief of the criminal division in that office. And guess what he did after this indictment came down? He resigned.
Mm, I hadn't
And
heard that.
yeah, he
No,
resigned. And if you look at a lot of the major news outlets now are
that's a big
reporting.
red flag. Yeah,
Well, but a lot of the major news outlets are actually reporting that they've confirmed that the reason he resigned is because of the office's decision to seek this indictment against
yeah.
him, which he viewed as politically
Yep,
motivated.
yep, yep, yep.
And the other thing is if you look at who signed off on this indictment, I mean, every indictment is signed by the head or the acting U.S.
Mm,
attorney in the office, which in this case is a guy named Robert McGuire. But
yeah.
if you look at the names who actually filed this indictment and are prosecuting this indictment, it
Jacob
appears,
Warren.
yeah,
Mm, yeah.
Jacob Warren, Christopher Eason, Jeremy
Mm,
Franker, these dudes are not, as far as I can tell, they're not Middle District of Tennessee guys.
yep.
They are
Main
from
justice.
their
Yeah.
main justice and they're from this It's called the Joint Task Force Vulcan, which which FYI
Oh my
is
gosh.
I did never heard of it before. I had to look
Yeah.
it up, but it was created in 2019, so first Trump administration, to go after MS at 13 and Trende Aragua. So these are outside people who have just taken this over. And that is also a red flag because you would think if anyone within the actual office in the jurisdiction of prosecution was on board
Yeah.
with this, they
They
would
wouldn't
sign
need main
up.
justice.
They wouldn't
This would
need
just
me
be
just.
right.
Yeah.
The core of this offense, human trafficking, basically the coyotes transporting um, people from Mexico into the United States and then throughout the United States. That's a run-of-the-mill offense that districts across the country routinely prosecute using their own line attorneys.
Yes.
They don't need the Department of Justice, main justice out in
Yes.
DC, sending in specialists. And the other thing that's really interesting too is where this is being prosecuted. There in the Middle District of Tennessee, because the last time I looked at a map, and tell me if I'm wrong, Doug, but the border of Tennessee does not conjoin Mexico or Canada or
Yeah.
any foreign country that I can recall.
Well,
I don't
there's a
know.
reason for that, Mark, and
Yeah.
that is
Okay.
because the only evidence that he was doing anything of the kind was because he got pulled over in Tennessee in this Suburban with 9 people in the car
Yeah.
in 2022. So I think
But
that is why they that's the only real evidence they have that shows he might have been engaged in transporting people that might not have been here legally. But even that is sketchy as fuck because if you look at what they say about that offense, they said that these folks didn't have ID on them, and they said that they think he lied about where they were coming from, St. Louis, and that they were working construction because there were no tools in the van and yada yada. But my question is, why are they not all arrested and prosecuted at that moment?
right.
Because you're absolutely right, Mark.
Yeah.
These are run-of-the-mill cases that get
Yeah.
prosecuted every day. And I mean, I live in Arizona, so I am in a
You
border
do.
state, and
Yep.
I saw these cases all the time. And here's how they go.
Yep.
They get pulled over and they get prosecuted on the spot. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
what happens is there's a driver who's prosecuted who's held for suspicion of alien smuggling, and then the people in the car are actually taken into custody as well. Not because they're going to be charged necessarily with a crime of, an immigration crime or being here illegally, but because they are what we call material witnesses.
Right.
And so what happens is they get taken into custody briefly only so long as they can get their depositions taken so that there's a sworn statement from them that they can use as evidence against the smuggler later at trial. And so I've actually represented those people too because they get lawyers.
Hmm.
And it happens within a few days that the depositions are taken and then those people are released and they're deported back to wherever they came from. And their testimony is preserved and the prosecution against the alleged smuggler then keeps moving forward. And
Yeah.
that, to my what I can see, none of that happened here in Tennessee in 2022. And the question is, how come? And the answer is likely because they didn't have the evidence.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
here's the other thing that I know, Mark, and before
Hmm.
you dig into the stats, those smugglers, if all they're doing is driving a person from point A to point B, and the government can prove they knew that they were here without documentation, they usually resolve those cases quite quickly with a plea, and those sentences are months, not years.
Yeah.
They are not serious crimes at all.
Correct.
And that is why I'm going back to my bottle of fucking Clase Azul, because I think even if he did what they say they did, he transported some aliens. It's a crime, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a serious crime in the federal system. But yet they're making him out to be the worst criminal of all time. They're saying, he's not just transporting people. They claim he's transporting guns. They have no evidence of that. They claim he's transporting drugs. I can see no evidence of that in the face of this indictment. They say he's abused some of the female people that he was transporting. Again, no evidence of that. And those people are long gone. There's not going to be anyone that could come in and testify to any of that so-called abuse. And then if you look in the bail motion, they throw in some extra special sauce. They go back to the wife beating stuff, and
Mm.
apparently he's a child pornographer too, and a murderer.
Yeah,
They
well, that's
say
yeah, right.
they say
So
that's how he got into MS-13 because he murdered a rival gang member, and that's why he had a credible fear of going back. So they've thrown in literally child pornography, murder, like I suspect he
but
may
they
have
waited
also.
until now. They waited until yesterday
Yes,
to indict him.
right,
So,
right.
Doug,
And by the way, I'm waiting for them to allege that he conspired with J.D. Vance to murder the Pope. And I believe there's some evidence that he may have raped the Easter Bunny, but go ahead.
right, right, right. Oh, I thought you were going to go to Elon Musk and Trump or something like that.
Oh,
But,
yeah. Well,
but
he's
I'm,
definitely in the Epstein
yeah,
file,
he was.
I'm
Yes, he was
sure.
on the plane too.
I think he
So
coordinated the whole thing on Epstein
he was a
Island.
co-pilot, or maybe a flight attendant.
Okay, sorry.
So stats. So
Yeah, let's do the
something really.
stats.
So we're not going to do sentencing stats per se just yet. Okay, so this is a new tool that we at Sentencing Stats came out with, and I'm not going to explain it, but I'm just going
Ooh,
to play around with a little bit of it. Kind of, it's Jason on steroids, and we'll talk
very
about that
nice.
some other time. But
Yeah.
here's what's interesting. So what I did is I went over here to the lead guidelines, and I selected 2L 1.1, 2L 1.2, 2L 2.1, and all the major illegal reentry and immigration offenses, all the guidelines. So, and I also looked at this is nationwide 2019 through 2023. There were 100,000, just over 100,000 immigration related cases
Hmm.
prosecuted in the United States during those 5 fiscal years, 2019 through 2023. And I don't go to 2024 because the commission hasn't released its data file yet, which is another story. But at any rate,
Which, by the way, that seems like a lot. That's a lot of cases in the grand scheme of federal
that's a
crime,
lot
isn't
of
it?
cases in the yes, because and what may surprise people is that immigration offenses are the number one offense federally. It used to be drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is a close second.
Yeah.
Last fiscal year, 2024, about 30% of all federal offenses were immigration related,
Yeah.
and 29% were drug trafficking, and the
Yeah.
rest was
Wait, and last year you said?
yeah.
Who was president last year? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, some guy named Biden, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
Yeah,
Because
something like that. Yes.
I thought the Democrats didn't prosecute immigration
Yeah,
offenses,
open
but
borders,
I
right.
guess your statistics don't bear that out.
Yes.
And
So
and I think Obama actually is on record of prosecuting the most of any sitting president, but I may be wrong
yes.
about that. But go ahead.
So here's what's interesting. Nationwide, 100,000. Let's look at your district. We can drill down real quick to
Oh yeah.
Arizona.
Well, we
Okay, let's
have
see
yeah, we
it.
have
And so in the last 5 fiscal years, there were 17,406 individuals
yeah.
prosecuted. Okay. So let's look at the Middle District of Tennessee and what's
Mhm.
going on over there.
I'm gonna
Okay.
guess. Let me guess. Can I
Yeah,
guess?
guess. Over five.
74.
Holy shit, dude. You're pretty close.
What is it?
73.
No way. Hey,
You win
you
the
gotta
price.
be
Actually,
kidding
you're
me.
$1 over.
Nobody is gonna believe. Oh, I would have lost on the Price is Right
You would
too.
have
What a
lost on the Price is
sad.
Right, but you know what? You win with me. That's very impressive,
Nobody's gonna
Doug.
believe that I didn't know the number, but I swear to God I didn't.
73. Doug, 73. Your district had thousands. They
Yeah,
only had 73 over 5 years.
yeah,
This also just screams at how suspicious and politically motivated this case was. They did allege, by the way, in the indictment and in the bail motion, that a lot of this took place in Texas.
hmm
Well, why not go down to the Southern District
yeah,
of Texas? They're experts at
right.
prosecuting these cases. So
Yes,
let's
last
just,
I checked, that was a border state as well.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. And so let's look
I
at
think it
Texas.
actually used to be Mexico.
It did. It did. Look at that.
Oof.
25,000 cases,
Wow, they beat
25,838.
Arizona.
They even beat Arizona in the
I
Southern
wish you would
District
have
of
let me
Texas.
guess that
Oh,
number.
yeah, you would have guessed $1 and won.
Yeah.
So, but
What did he win, Bob?
yeah,
A
well,
ticket to El Salvador.
yeah. So this is, these statistics just right there
Yeah.
really bear out how suspicious and his prosecution is, and why it's being done in the Middle District of Tennessee. And I think probably the reason why is nobody in these border states was gonna take it, and there would have been mass resignations down there
Right.
that would have really screwed up
Or that there's
those
no
attorneys'
evidence. There's
offices.
just no evidence that they can muster that can put him in any other place committing any alleged offense besides Tennessee.
But they
Because,
do. But the point is, though, they allege that it occurred in Texas too.
yeah, but that's
Yes,
just some cooperating unknown co-conspirator. They
that's
only
enough to
ever,
get jurisdiction,
ugh,
though.
yeah, but well, okay, but assuming it's reliable and they think they can prove that and not have a
Yeah,
motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction when the evidence comes out about
yeah,
who they are and what they're saying. I
yeah.
submit they just have this one little traffic stop in Tennessee, and that's the best they could muster up, and that's why it's there.
Well, I think that's part of it, but my gut is telling me the bigger part of it is it was very easy to manipulate that office into taking this case.
Well,
I mean,
apparently
it's
not because the dude quit, but
well, one guy quit, but
yeah,
the office did not resign in mass, and
yeah,
they're still prosecuting. So anyway, are we ready to talk about sentencing
yeah,
now? Okay.
absolutely.
Unfortunately, he's screwed. So let me just bring up the
Which, when you said that before we got rolling today, I was so surprised just for the fact that, like I said, I've seen these cases and the
yeah.
sentences are quite quite low,
Well,
and that's not connecting with what you're going to tell us here.
no, it's not. So let me
So,
share another screen here before we get to that, though, just to give some context to what immigration sentences look like. And by the way, when we say immigration offenses, what we're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about illegal reentry, that whole group of offense types.
and
But
for the
as
anyone who's listening to this on
yeah,
audio only, you really should be on the YouTubes because we've got really cool visual charts and graphs and whatnot. But go ahead.
right. So here is the sentence length on average that has been imposed under the four major immigration guidelines from 2015 through 2024. So over the last 10 fiscal years. Now, just for those of you who have been listening, the commission is reporting its 2024 data. It just hasn't released its data file yet. So jerks like me can go through and point out their errors. But at any rate,
I would
so
not call you a jerk.
yeah,
I would maybe call you a geek, but that's different
yeah.
because
Well,
you like to geek out on the stats.
I do. I love to geek out on this. So, at any rate, what we can see here are the where the average sentences go. So 2L 1.1, that's actually the human trafficking guideline. That is what Garcia is going to be sentenced under if he's convicted. And we
Uh-huh.
can see here that about 16 months on average is now around 15 months. That's the average sentence over the last 10 fiscal years. And it's been rather consistent. And the other major guideline appears 2L 2L 1.2. That's the illegal reentry. That's the illegal reentry guideline, and we can see that's somewhere around a year is usually what they're getting. So the point is, these are not massively, these are not exceedingly long sentences on
Yeah.
average. Usually under a year or around a year. And as you and I know, Doug, if you get like a sentence of 16, if you get any sentence of a year and a day or greater, you only have to do 85% of it. So,
Hmm.
they're only doing months generally in
Yeah.
prison, not years. It's months and then they're deported. So, unfortunately for Mr. Garcia, he's looking at something significantly higher. And let me get to the guideline here and I'll explain why. And it's what's really interesting about this. Let me find, where did I put the guideline? Oh, there it is. Um, you might want to edit all that out.
Yeah, I can edit.
Yeah, it's he is going to be hit so hard that I could not find any other defendant over the last 10 years nationwide that is going to have his total offense level. And I'm going to add it up here for you first. So the first thing is that you have multiple base offense levels, 25, 23, 12, and it depends on how certain aspects of your offense. And what the highest one, a base offense level of 25, which means that's what you're going to start out at. It's a 25. It's what all this rigmarole means. If he was convicted under a 1327 of a violation of an alien who was inadmissible under 1182, what that means in English is if he was trafficking gang members or terrorists, and he's alleged to have been trafficking gang members. So he's going to start out at a 25.
Okay,
That
but he's
go ahead.
not alleged to have violated 1327 in the indictment. It's only 1324.
Oh, 13. That's true. Sorry. So that's, well, good for him.
Yeah.
Sorry. Let me look at that. I missed that in the indictment. I thought it was
I mean, they're
1327.
saying, and that's interesting too, now that I
Yeah.
think about it, because they're saying he's probably smuggling gang members or
Yeah.
this is an MS-13 network that he's conspiring to operate. And I'm pretty sure I read in there that he's transporting illegal gang members. So the
Yeah. No,
fact that they're saying that, but that yet they didn't charge him with
that is
1327 is maybe
That is
interesting.
interesting. That is interesting. So
What
good
does that
catch.
tell you? Class Azul is what that tells you.
Yeah. Well, lucky for him, then he's going to start out at a 12. So it's not going to be as bad as I thought for him,
Hmm.
assuming he doesn't get hit with a superseding indictment now. And they do charge him with a 1327 offense or, an upward variance. But at any rate, so he's going to start out at a 12. Then, if the offense involved the smuggling, transporting, or harboring of six or more unlawful aliens, well, he's alleged to have smuggled, trafficked in hundreds or over 100 at the very least,
Wait, but he gets the three levels for, oh wait, if the offense was committed other than for
other than for
profit.
profit. Yeah, no,
Oh,
this was
oh,
for
so
profit.
wait, decreased by three levels. Never
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Sorry.
So, yeah, that's not going to apply here, but the number
Okay.
of aliens is going to apply. So he's going to get a +9 for that.
Well,
So,
but we've talked about this a lot, and
mhm,
this is about relevant conduct
mhm.
because what I think they're probably at the end of the day going to be able to prove, if anything, is nine, because that's how many were in the Suburban when he was pulled over in Nashville. And god damn, I don't even know how they prove that those nine, because all it says in the indictment is they had no ID. It didn't allege that they were here unlawfully, illegally, without pay. They
Right.
just suspected that's what he's doing. So where is the evidence to convict him at all, let alone to show how many people? All we have are co-conspirators who said, and a conspiracy, this conspiracy that says they've smuggled thousands.
Doug, I'm with you. I'm just assuming the truth of the indictment is how
Okay.
I'm analyzing. So,
All right.
assuming the truth of the indictment, these are the enhancements that are going to
Okay.
apply. So, I missed the 1327. So, luckily, they overlooked that. So, he hasn't been charged with 1327. So, he's going to have the lowest, not the highest base offense level of 12. He's alleged to have trafficked in over 100 individuals. So he's going to get a +9. So now we're up to 21. If the defendant committed any part of the instant offense after sustaining a conviction for a felony immigration offense,
He,
it's not alleged in the indictment, as I recall, or I didn't fully read the bail motion, but I did read some articles, some news articles that says that he was deported once before. And I don't know if that's a
yeah.
felony or not. But
I
if it
don't think it is. I
Okay.
think if you had been convicted of a crime here and then deported and then come back, then it definitely would be. But
Okay.
I don't think that.
Okay.
Plus,
So
we would have
eh,
heard about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. So that hopefully that's not the case for him. If he has a prior felony conviction, he's going to get a plus
Yeah.
2 here. Plus, he's going to have a higher criminal history category. But assuming he doesn't have any criminal history, then this won't apply. If the offense involves smuggling, harboring a minor,
Yeah.
transporting a minor, and sorry, who was
They probably
unaccompanied,
they
I
probably will try to say that. I
yeah, I
think
think they're
they
going to. So now he's at a 4, so we're at 25 now. That's going to add plus 4. Firearms. I don't, just looking at the indictment, it doesn't allege that he discharged or brandished a firearm in a threatening way to, keep his customers in control or anything. But it
yeah.
did say that he was transporting, he was
Yes.
buying
Right.
firearms down in Texas and bringing them to Maryland and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he's going to get another 2 levels
Yeah.
for that. So now we're at a 27. And then if the offense involved intentionally or recklessly creating substantial risk of death or serious bodily injury, I could see them
They're
arguing
gonna
that too. Yeah.
totally gonna go that. That's
Mm.
over this indictment with the modifications to the
Yep.
cars, the adding of the seats, not using restraints, trying to fit as many people in for profit. Well, I see that all the time. They're
Yeah.
100% going for that.
So we're at a 29. I didn't see any allegations, and they don't need to be, by the way. Sentencing factors do not need to be alleged in the indictment.
Right.
So
But
for
they're going for that too, death, because this is charges of conspiracy, and part of the members of conspiracy allegedly overturned a tractor trailer in Mexico, killing several
that's right. I forgot about that.
transportees.
Yes, right.
So, which he has zero to do with any of that, but that's
But
why they charge it with conspiracy, which
right.
means they'll try to get that under relevant conduct. So
But
put
that
that
may
in
not,
there.
yeah, that may not come in under relevant conduct and JUCA, jointly undertaking criminal activity. But assuming it does,
They're going to
assuming
try.
they're going to try. So that's another 10. So now we're at a 39. So forget what I said again. He is screwed. So, and let's see. Finally, if an alien was involuntarily detained or coerced in connection with a demand for payment, I don't recall seeing anything like that.
I didn't.
Yeah. So
I saw an allegation that he allegedly abused women in his charge, but that doesn't fit squarely under that.
yeah, or the prostitution one. That's the second prong there, or B, if he was harboring an alien for the purposes of prostitution. I'm not sure of that there. So anyway, he's at a 39 at the very least. Because it's a conspiracy,
Yeah.
they're going to go after a roll adjustment here. At the lowest roll adjustment, as we know, is a 2. So just giving him that, now he's at a 41. If he pleads guilty, he'll get 3 levels off. Let's assume that he pleads guilty. So now he's at a 38. So I don't know. Can you see this sentencing chart here?
Yeah.
Okay. So at a 38, actually, let me bring up a different one here. So at an offense level of 38, the guidelines call for 235 to 293 months, so around 20 years is what he's looking at under the guidelines. Now, when I tried, I'm on Jason right now, and when I tried to do this on Jason, nothing comes up. Like I said, because oops, here we go. Yeah, they don't have enough. There's not enough individuals that meet that criteria. There's probably none, because usually there in immigration cases the total offense level is much, 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 much lower. But here, the way they've charged it, and assuming all these allegations are true, and this is somewhat of a conservative calculation, he's looking at an offense level 38, and that's with pleading guilty. And so the guidelines would call for 20 years. He'd probably end up doing maybe getting sentenced to around half of that. And where I get that from is, if we look at, see, what did I say? A 38. See, even a 38, see all these, if you're seeing this sentencing table, do you see all these little dashes down here?
Yep.
Yeah, that means there's no data.
Oh,
So for over the last 10 years nationwide, under all of the 4 major immigration guidelines, nobody was at a 38. The highest was around a 33 in criminal history
yeah.
category 1.
Well, isn't
So
that in and of itself telling that they've tried to kitchen sink this to the point where
Yeah.
nobody has ever had a guideline that high for this kind of offense.
Yes, that's
Okay.
just another red flag. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. If we just look at all the guidelines, we're going to throw them all in. Let's just see what he's looking at here. This is including drug trafficking, fraud, child pornography, all types of offenses. Everybody that had an offense level 38, generally they were running sentences from 10 to 20 years. So somewhere in that range is what a typical sentence is. Most everybody got below the guideline range.
Yeah.
For the 57% received a sentence below the range. So my gut is telling me what he should expect if all of these are proven is a sentence of around 10 years, maybe 15, statistically speaking.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of data. Well, there's no data for those that are similarly situated. So the judge would be kind of embarking on new territory here. This is
Yeah.
what us Catholics call sui generis, one of a kind.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how this unfolds because I see, as a defense lawyer, red flags all over this
Oh
in
yeah,
terms of what the proof is and what the motivation is and how he lines up against other people charged with these kinds of offenses. But
yeah,
what I mean, here's a couple things I'll be interested to see how they unfold. First is bail.
yeah,
So he's, thank God, out of CCOT in El Salvador. Now he'll be in a pretrial detention facility in and around Nashville. I don't know exactly what that facility is, but it's going to be a lot better than where he was. So I'm guessing he's quite happy to be stateside, even if he is incarcerated. It's going to be better than where he was. But everybody who's charged with an offense is entitled to a bail hearing.
yeah,
And typically, the government there's a presumption in favor of release. So this is the question, can he get out pending trial? Now, the government has a burden of proof, and they have to prove either by preponderance of evidence that he's a risk of flight or by clear and convincing evidence that he's a danger. And
yeah.
I've read their bail motion, they're arguing both.
Right.
The flight risk is kind of rich, in my opinion, because
He
they're the
doesn't want to
ones,
leave.
yeah, he's happy as fuck to be home.
Yeah,
He never wanted to leave. They're the ones that sent him
yeah.
back to El
Right.
Salvador. He can't go back
Exactly.
there. So it's
Right.
like,
Right.
okay, I can't believe they made that argument with a
Yeah.
straight face.
Right.
And they're gonna hammer the danger stuff home. But again,
Yeah.
this is
Well, he's
all based on,
MS-13. He's a member of MS-13 and blah blah blah.
yeah, and so
So
that's gonna be real interesting because they're
yeah,
gonna
I'd
have
like to
to
see.
show their cards.
Yeah, they're going
They're
to
gonna
have
have to
to
prove
have
that by clear and convincing evidence, a high standard.
those CCs, those cooperating conspirators, are going to have to come in at that hearing and testify.
If I am a defense lawyer in this case, that is my first trial. I am
Hmm.
going
Mm.
to make a federal fucking case out of the bail
Yep.
hearing because that's their burden and it's a high one for clear and convincing. The other thing I thought was really interesting is shouldn't it just be easy for the government to say he can't be released because he has no legal status here? But they never raised that I saw in their bail motion, which leads me to believe, and I want to get an immigration expert on here because
Yeah.
I'm not even close, but because he has been granted relief from removal because of a credible threat to his life, he probably could be released under the immigration in an immigration court. And so they had to go to great lengths to use the general flight risk and danger stuff to make sure that a judge didn't release him otherwise. That's what I'm interested to know. I want to know how that immigration piece fits in. Because usually if I have a client with no status, we
Hmm.
waive the bail hearing because there's no judge going to order release if he's
Right.
because what happens is immigration will take him and then deport him and then they can't prosecute him.
Yeah.
So that's another weird rub. So I want to know how
Yeah.
that goes, and I want to know how this guy gets a fair trial and in any jurisdiction in the United States, given all of the horrible, terrible shit that the administration has been saying about him for the last several months. I mean, there's not
Well,
a person in this country who hasn't been living under a rock that hasn't heard MS-13, wife
yeah.
beater, this, that, and the other. So I
Well,
don't know.
it looks like in their bail motion, they're just trying to, it's kind of like guilt by association. I'm just going through it right now, and I don't see any proffer from the government that they're going to call witnesses
Yeah.
at trial. It's just res ipsa loquitur. It speaks for itself, Judge. I mean, they might as well
Right.
say, he's Hispanic. They're
Right.
all gang members.
Right.
This is what they write on page 8 of their motion. On March 28th, 2019, the defendant was arrested in Prince George's County, Maryland, with other known MS gang members. No citation, anything, no identification of who these people are,
Right.
no exhibit under seal, nothing. Based on where the defendant was, so Prince George's County,
It's a
and by the
HUD,
way,
apparently.
but that's kind of code there too, because Prince George's County is, as I recall, it's white minority. It is very,
Oh,
it's very
I didn't know.
heavily African American and Hispanic. So based on where the defendant was, and we all know that these blacks and Hispanics are nothing but gang members.
Hmm.
Not being sarcastic for those that are just tuning in.
I'm going to
Based
take
on,
that soundbite and just put it on
I'm half
social
Mexican.
media.
Yeah, I'm half Mexican, so only a half a gang banger. So based on where the defendant was, who the defendant was with, other known members of MS-13, his clothing. They don't say what about his clothing. They say his clothing. He was wearing clothes, and so
Uh-huh. No, we
Hispanics
talked
with
about
clothes.
this. We
Yeah.
talked about this on the other podcast. He had a Chicago Bulls
Yeah.
hat or a shirt, and that's what they were talking
And
about.
the fact that he appeared to be selling marijuana, which is legal in Maryland,
I was
led
wondering that. Well,
you know
that makes
let
him dumb if he's
yeah,
selling pot that you
yeah,
could buy it.
exactly. I mean,
Fuck it.
exactly.
That's not a crime. If that were a crime, half this administration would be buried under the
Right,
jail.
right. So, and the fact he appeared to be selling marijuana led those involved in the arrest of the defendant to determine that the defendant was a member or associate of MS-13.
Yeah.
In substance, unless the defendant has status in the gang, the MS-13 gang members arrested with defendant would not have allowed the defendant to represent MS-13 in their presence. What
Hmm.
kind of argument is that?
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's well, it just speaks for
Yeah.
yourself, Judge. He's Hispanic and he has clothes on.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, definitely a gang member. And, he's with these
Right.
other guys, which we don't know who they are. And even if
Yeah.
they're gang members, doesn't make him
Yeah.
one, you
And they
know.
cited his tattoos, but like I said in this other podcast, we actually had a really amazing guy who's a former Mexican mafia gang member, and he knows a lot about these tattoos and everything else. And you know that there was that deal where they photoshopped MS-13 on the hand, but
Oh,
aside from
God,
that,
yes.
he did have a tattoo on his hand, but Angel Garcia, who was the expert on this other podcast, says yes, that could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that
Right.
it's common. He's seen it. He's seen that tattoo in many other contexts. So
Yeah.
that is kind of a thin reed
Right.
to rest on.
Yeah.
And so, but that all goes back to my biggest question is what can they prove?
Right.
Because it seems like they are stretching, harder than a hot chick in a yoga class because I do not
That
see
was an
this.
interesting
Wait,
analogy.
was that
That
not,
was,
that's probably not,
that's
probably
probably,
not a good
probably
one
delete
either.
that. Yeah. I would
Um,
edit that one out.
I may or I may not. But, it's, I think it's very fair to say it's political, and I think the resignation of the U.S. attorney, the assistant U.S. attorney, is probably the best evidence. But listen, we've seen, I don't know, 1,000 of these indictments, and this one raises so many red flags, it's not even funny. But,
Yeah.
you know, I
But I
guess
think
it,
that this bail motion too corroborates all of that. It corroborates all of that because it doesn't cite to any evidence.
yeah,
It's just a narrative.
yeah,
It's like, Judge,
yeah,
just take our fucking word.
right,
He's Hispanic.
right,
And he's in Prince George's County.
right.
And he smelled like marijuana. So
Right.
of course he's MS-13.
And this is our bread and butter. It's called due process. And if they
Right.
have the goods, then you introduce evidence in a court of law and you prove it.
Yeah.
And if these allegations are true, they should have cell phone records, social media posts, wire transfers, text messages, somebody other than another convicted criminal who's now saying this, that, or the other about them.
Exhibits. They could have had exhibits
Right.
attached to this.
They didn't attach one
Zero.
exhibit. So,
Nothing.
I guess my final word in this is that, people say, how are you dying on this hill? How are you supporting this, this so-called horrible, murderous MS-13, human smuggler, child pornographer, you name it. And I will say this, even if he is found guilty of every little thing that they have alleged in this indictment, I'm still proud to stand on that hill and proud to die on that
Yeah,
hill
well, that's our
because
system of justice. And this is,
exactly
yeah. And
all
this
we
is,
ever asked for, and this is what I
yeah,
was bitching about for the last two podcast
yeah,
episodes, was due process. All we ever
right.
asked for was for him to have his day in court. And when
Yeah,
they sent him to CCOT, he didn't get
yeah,
it, and now he will.
right.
And so we're going to get to see due process in action. And as a defense lawyer and a citizen of this country that I love, who prides itself on affording every single person their rights and under the Constitution, I'm super glad that he's stateside, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah,
I
good.
hope he has a great lawyer who just hits the ground running.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Which, by the way, if the lawyer watches that, and God forbid if this ends up at sentencing and needs any help, I hope he looks us up.
yeah. Well, I know a few people there in the Middle
Yeah,
District of Tennessee, so I'm going
yeah.
to make sure they listen to this podcast.
I heard
Thank,
there's something called bourbon or something like down there that may be good.
huh?
I guess they call that what, American tequila.
Well, that's the George Dickel, I think is, and it's Tennessee whiskey, and there's a
Yeah.
great song that Tennessee whiskey. But I will say that I
Oh, bourbon
presented.
is Kentucky. Bourbon is, excuse me.
Well,
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, no, true.
technically, yes, bourbon is
Yeah,
Kentucky, but
sorry.
it's bourbon doesn't have to be Kentucky, but the Tennessee.
Ooh, I don't know about that. That's like saying champagne doesn't have to be from the Champagne
Well,
region of France, or
uh, you know,
tequila can be anywhere else outside of the Jalisco, the state of Jalisco in Mexico.
well, I think the rule is literally that bourbon has to be produced in the United States, but it doesn't have to be. That's my understanding of
I
it.
thought it had to be from Bourbon County, Kentucky.
No, because
Uh,
what makes bourbon bourbon is the mash bill. In other words, bourbon
mm,
has to be 51% corn to be bourbon. So it's like what makes rye rye is it has to be 51% rye. And so whiskey is just whiskey. That's the umbrella. But I think Tennessee whiskey is definitely a thing. And I know that because I was at an NACDL conference several years ago and I called my best buddy, my brother Mark Lerner here, who's a whiskey expert. He's from Lexington.
mm,
And I said, "What do I drink when I'm in Tennessee, when I'm in Nashville?" And he said, "George Dickel." And so I
George
went
Dickel.
out and got a bottle of George Dickel, and I inadvertently drank so much that I almost missed my presentation at the NACDL. And I will
Oh,
never fucking drink Tennessee whiskey again in my
wow,
life. It was
that
not
good.
cool. It was not cool. Anywho, well, thanks for spending your Saturday afternoon and evening with us, Mark. It's good to see you as always, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.